Welcome to the show. And please tell me where you're watching this video. Leave your reply in the comments below. February 2026. The skies over Bamako and Ouagadougou are quiet. No French jets scream overhead. No new sanctions make the headlines today. But do not let the silence fool you. This is not peace. This is the holding of breath before the trap snaps shut. For 3 years, the West tried to break the Sahel with iron. They failed. Now, they have returned with something far more dangerous: gold. The United States and the IMF have replaced their threats with smiles and their embargoes with loans. They call it normalization. We call it the softest form of strangulation. They are offering water to a man dying of thirst, but the cup is poisoned. This is the new battlefield, not of trenches, but of bank accounts. The enemy is no longer at the gates. They are being invited into the parlor. Will the Alliance of Sahel States trade their hard-won dignity for a line of credit? Or will they see the shackles hidden inside the handshake and do not look away? What comes next may change how we read the map of Africa forever. Subscribe and keep watching to understand the storm that is brewing in 2026. We must first look at the silence that preceded it. For years, the narrative from the West was one of noise and fury. They spoke in the language of ultimatums. They spoke in the language of sanctions. The United States, the European Union, and the financial architects in Washington looked at the Sahel and saw only defiance. They saw soldiers in fatigues: Ibrahim Traoré, Assimi Goïta, Abdourahmane Tidiane, and they called them juntas. They called them illegitimate. They closed their embassies, withdrew their ambassadors, and waited for the economies of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger to collapse under the weight of isolation. They waited for the soil to crack. They waited for the people to starve. They waited for the inevitable surrender. But the surrender? The Alliance of Sahel States, AEs, turned their backs to the Atlantic and looked east. They found new partners. They found new roads. And in doing so, they proved a terrifying truth to the Western powers. The old colonial master is no longer the only merchant in the market. And so, in late 2025, the West did something remarkable. They stopped shouting. They stopped the threats. They realized that the stick had broken in their hands, so they reached into their pockets to find a carrot. The first drop of this diplomatic rain fell in October 2025. It was quiet, bureaucratic, almost boring to the untrained eye. The Financial Action Task Force, the global watchdog that decides who can move money and who cannot, suddenly removed Burkina Faso from its gray list. For years, this list was a cage. It branded Burkina Faso as risky. It made every international transaction a struggle, every transfer a suspicion. It was a financial blockade in all but name. Then, overnight, the cage was unlocked. The FATF declared that Burkina Faso had improved its standards. Do not be naive. This was not a reward for good bookkeeping. This was not a technical decision. It was a strategic preparation. You cannot buy influence in a country if you cannot send money to it. By clearing the financial channels in October, the West was paving the road for the convoy of cash they intended to send in 2026. They were greasing the gears of the very machine they once tried to dismantle. Then came the second drop. As 2025 bled into 2026, the rhetoric from Washington shifted. The lectures on democracy vanished. The moral outrage evaporated. By January 2026, the United States State Department had recalibrated its entire African strategy. They stopped talking about elections and started talking about security. They stopped talking about values and started talking about pragmatism. Why? Because they looked at the map. They saw Russia's Africa. Core. Securing the borders. They saw Chinese infrastructure projects rising from the dust. They realized that while they were busy preaching, they were losing the continent. The United States decided that it would rather work with a military government that listens to Washington than a democracy that listens to Moscow. This brings us to the deluge. On the 4th of February, 2026, the strategy moved from paper to pavement. It was a coordinated two-pronged offensive designed to overwhelm the EES with kindness. In Bamako, Mali, a plane touched down carrying Nick Checker, the head of the U.S. State Department's Bureau of African Affairs. This was not a low-level bureaucrat. This was the highest-level American envoy to set foot on Malian soil since the diplomatic rupture. He did not come to scold. He came to sit with Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop. He came to talk about revitalizing relations. He came to offer security cooperation, the very same security assistance the U.S. had previously withheld to punish the revolution. At the exact same moment, hundreds of miles away in Ouagadougou, another plane had landed. An IMF mission. The financial arm of Western influence was sitting down with President Ibrahim Traoré and his government. Just months prior, these institutions treated Burkina Faso as a pariah. Now, in February 2026, they sat in the presidential palace, praising the country's remarkable progress. They spoke of resilience. They spoke of budget support. They praised the government for keeping the deficit within limits, for reforming the tax code, for cleaning up the payroll. It was a surreal performance. The same West that had predicted the collapse of the Sahel was now applauding its management. But we must ask, why? Why this sudden urgency? Why send the diplomats and the bankers on the same week to the same alliance with the same message of partnership? It is because they are afraid. They are not afraid of the AES failing. They are afraid of the AES succeeding without them. They see the nuclear deals with Rosatom. They see the gold refineries being built in Bamako. They see a region that is slowly, painfully, but surely cutting the umbilical cord of colonial dependence. The visit of Nick Checker and the return of the IMF are not signs of respect. They are signs of desperation. They are trying to re-enter the house before the door is bolted shut forever. They are bringing gifts to the funeral of their own hegemony, hoping that if they smile wide enough, we will forget who held the knife just yesterday. They call it diplomacy. We call it a soft siege. They have realized that if they cannot defeat the AES on the battlefield, they will try to buy it in the boardroom. They opened the gates not to let us out, but to let their influence back in. But they forgot one thing. The locks had already been changed. While the diplomats in Washington and Brussels were busy polishing their shoes and printing their loan agreements, the Alliance of Sahel States was looking at a different kind of power. Not the power of signatures on a check, but the power of physics. The power of the atom. The power of the sun. The West came with soft power. The AES answered with hard energy. This is the fundamental disconnect that the IMF missions in early 2026 failed to understand. They thought that after years of sanctions, the people of the Sahel were hungry for cash. They were wrong. The people are hungry for electricity. You cannot industrialize a nation with debt relief. You cannot run a factory on good intentions. You need megawatts. And this is where the pivot to the East becomes not just a political statement, but a survival strategy. While the West was offering to manage poverty, Russia's Rosatom was offering the tools to end it. The difference is stark. A loan from the IMF is a leash that stretches across the Atlantic. A power plant built on your own soil is a shield that protects you from the dark. Look at the timeline. It tells a story of ambition that the Western media refuses to broadcast. In Mali, the partnership with Rosatom is not theoretical. It is rising from the dust. The construction of a 200-megawatt solar power plant is already underway. This is not a charity project to light a few light bulbs in a village. This is a massive injection of industrial capacity, designed to boost the national grid by 10%. It is a direct challenge to the old model, where Mali was forced to import expensive fuel, often from Western companies, just to keep the lights on. But the vision goes deeper. In June 2025, Burkina Faso signed the final administrative milestones for a nuclear power plant. Let that sink in. A landlocked nation, once written off by the world as too poor to dream, is now on the path to becoming a nuclear energy producer. Critics in Paris and New York scoffed. They called it a fantasy. They asked, how can they afford it? But they missed the point. Ibrahim Traoré and his peers understand that sovereignty is expensive, but dependence costs more. They know that nuclear energy is a long road. It takes a decade to build, but it is the only road that leads to true autonomy. And then there is Niger. For 50 years, French companies dug the uranium out of Niger's ground to light the streets of Paris, while the villages around the mines sat in darkness. That era is over. The discussions for a 2,000-megawatt nuclear facility signify a total reversal of history. The uranium will no longer leave. It will stay. It will work. It will burn to power the very hands that dug it up. This is the concrete shield. The West offers budget support. Money that vanishes into the bureaucracy. Money that must be paid back with interest. Money that comes with a list of rules about who you can hire and what you can buy. It is a sugar rush for the economy, sweet for a moment, but leaving you weaker than before. In contrast, the East offers infrastructure. A reactor does not lecture you on human rights. A solar field does not threaten to cut off funding. If you buy the wrong weapons, it simply works. It produces value. It creates the surplus energy needed to process gold, to refine cotton, to build a manufacturing base that belongs to Africa, not to foreign shareholders. The choice facing the EES in 2026 is the choice between the easy path and the right path. The IMF says, take this money, stabilize your currency, and we will be friends again. The leadership of the Sahel says, keep your money. We are building a foundation that does not depend on your mood. It is a gamble of historic proportions. To reject the immediate relief of Western cash requires a spine of steel. It requires asking the population to endure hardship today for a promise of power tomorrow. It is a race between the patience of the people and the pressure of the banks. But as the sun sets over the Sahel, one thing is clear. The West offered a lifeline, made of paper. The East offered a foundation made of concrete and uranium. One floats away in the wind. The other builds a future that cannot be moved. The most dangerous weapon in modern warfare does not make a sound when it is fired. It is the silent, creeping ink of a signature on a loan agreement. When the IMF delegation sat down in Ouagadougou in February 2026, they did not bring handcuffs. They brought a resilience and sustainability facility. They brought promises of $122.7 million to help the Sahel cope with climate shocks. It sounds noble. It sounds like partnership. But in the world of geopolitics, there is no such thing as free money. Every dollar comes with a conditionality. This is the technical term for a political leash. To access these funds, Burkina Faso and its allies are being asked to perform a miracle that no Western nation would attempt during a war. They are asked to balance their books while fighting for their lives. The IMF demands that budget deficits be slashed to below 3% of GDP by 2027. Let us strip away the economic jargon and look at what this means for the soldier on the front line and the mother in the market. To reduce a deficit while fighting a total war against insurgency is impossible without sacrifice. It means the government must stop hiring new soldiers. It means they must cut the fuel subsidies that keep transport affordable. It means delaying the purchase of ammunition to ensure the quarterly report looks pragmatic to a board of directors in Washington. It creates a deadly paradox. If the EES accepts this money to stabilize the economy, they must destabilize their own security. The West knows this. They know that if the state cuts spending, the cost of living will rise. When the price of bread goes up, the people get angry. When the people get angry, the streets fill with protesters. And when the streets are full of chaos, the government is weak, and a weak government is easy to topple. This is the Trojan horse of 2026. The loan is not a lifeline. It is a wedge designed to drive a gap between the revolutionary leaders and the people who support them. For the past 3 years, the social contract in the Sahel has been built on a simple, ironclad promise. We will suffer together, but we will be free. The people accepted the hardship because they saw their leaders in fatigues, eating the same dust, fighting the same war. But what happens if that contract is broken by foreign debt? If Burkina Faso accepts the Western framework, they essentially hand over the keys of their sovereignty to the same institutions that kept them on a gray list just months ago. The decisions about where to build a road or how much to pay a teacher will no longer be made in Ouagadougou. They will be suggested in Washington and implemented in Africa. This is the temptation of normalization. It promises a return to the global fold. It promises easier trade, cheaper imports, and the applause of the international community. It is a comfortable cage, but we must ask ourselves, what is the cost of this comfort? If the price of cheaper bread is the silence of your army, is the bread sweet or does it taste of ash? If the cost of a lower interest rate is the inability to defend your borders, have you saved the economy or have you sold the nation? Tell us in the comments. Would you take the money and risk the trap, or would you starve the beast and keep your freedom? The leaders of the AES are now walking a razor's edge. To refuse the money is to ask their people to endure yet another year of austerity. To accept it is to invite the fox back into the henhouse. The chains of debt are lighter than the chains of iron. You cannot feel them around your wrists. They do not rattle when you walk. But make no mistake, they are much, much harder to break. And the key is being dangled right in front of their eyes. The question is not if they will take the money. The question is, what will they be forced to give up in return? Why has the tone in Washington and Brussels shifted so dramatically? Why are they trading insults for invitations? The answer is simple. The West is losing, and they know it. For decades, the script was written in Paris and directed by Washington. But in 2026, the stage has collapsed. The humiliating exit of French troops was not just a logistical failure. It was a psychological shattering of the France-Afrique myth. The vacuum they left behind was supposed to be filled with chaos. Instead, it was filled by the Africa Corps. Russia did not just send mercenaries. They sent a state-backed security guarantee. They replaced the paternalism of the Élysée Palace with the pragmatism of the Kremlin. This terrifies the Western strategists more than any jihadist insurgency ever could. They are not afraid of terrorism in the Sahel. They are afraid of losing their monopoly on influence. The United States, watching France burn its bridges, has decided not to make the same mistake. This is why we see the pivot. It is a desperate attempt to salvage a foothold in a region that is rapidly slipping out of their orbit. They are willing to swallow their pride and sit at the table with military leaders because the alternative is to watch from the outside as China builds the roads and Russia guards the gates. But there is a darker game being played on the periphery. While they send diplomats to Bamako, they are simultaneously fortifying the coast. Look at the map. Look at the sudden influx of military aid to Benin, to Ghana, to Ivory Coast. This is the strategy of coastal containment. They are building a wall of influence around the Alliance of Sahel States, hoping to isolate the revolution, to keep it landlocked, to starve it of access to the sea. At the center of this geopolitical storm stands Ibrahim Traoré. To the west, he is a dangerous anomaly. He is not the typical African leader they can buy with a villa in the Riviera or a seat at a UN summit. He represents a new generation that reads history differently, not as a tragedy to be endured, but as a destiny to be seized. Washington's soft power campaign is specifically designed to neutralize his influence, not by removing him, but by entangling him in a web of dependencies that make his revolutionary rhetoric impossible to implement. They want to turn him from a revolutionary into a manager. They want to dilute the wine of sovereignty with the water of compromise. But the West has miscalculated. They assume that every man has a price, and every nation has a breaking point. They look at the poverty of the Sahel and see weakness. They do not see the steel that has been forged in the fire of this struggle. The containment will fail because ideas do not need a coastline to travel. The spirit of the EES has already crossed the borders. The youth in the coastal states are watching. They are listening. And they are asking their own leaders, why are we still on our knees? When our brothers in the Sahel are standing up, they smile at the front door while they sharpen knives at the back. But the captain is not sleeping. So, what lies ahead? We stand at a crossroads, where the dust of the desert meets the ink of the treaty. The Alliance of Sahel States faces a choice that will define not just the next election cycle, but the next century. One path is smooth. It is paved with Western loans. It is lined with the polite applause of the international community. If the EES takes this road, the immediate crisis will fade. The currency will stabilize. The imported goods will flow back into the markets. The middle class in the capitals will breathe a sigh of relief. But this road is a circle. It leads right back to where we started. Dependency. If they sign the papers, they accept that their budget is no longer theirs to write. They accept that their security is a line item to be approved by a foreign accountant. They accept that the gold beneath their feet is merely collateral for a debt they can never truly repay. This is the Trojan horse scenario. You open the gates to receive a gift, and in the night, the soldiers of influence climb out to retake the city from within. The other path is rocky. It is steep. It is not paved with gold, but with sweat. This is the path of nuclear sovereignty. It is the path of waiting for the reactors to be built. It is the path of enduring the scorn of the West while the foundations of the solar plants are laid. It is the path where the people must tighten their belts today so that their children do not have to beg tomorrow. It is a terrifying path because it offers no guarantees, only possibilities. But it is the only path that leads to the mountaintop. True sovereignty is not a flag. It is the ability to say no. It is the ability to turn on a light switch without asking permission from Paris. It is the ability to defend a border without waiting for a UN resolution. The West knows this. That is why they are scrambling. They know that if one small landlocked nation can succeed in breaking the chains of neo-colonialism, the rest of the continent will follow. If Mali can power its own grid, if Niger can refine its own uranium, then the entire narrative of African helplessness collapses. The risk is enormous. The pressure to conform will be suffocating. There will be attempts to divide the leadership. There will be whispers of betrayal. But the reward is nothing less than the soul of the Sahel. We are witnessing the painful birth of a new reality. The old world is dying, and the new one is struggling to be born. The labor pains are severe. The night is dark. But for the first time in generations, the dawn that is coming belongs to us. The road is long, and the shoes are worn, but the destination is home. History is watching. The pen is poised. Will they sign their names on the treaty of the past or on the map of a new world? Ladies and gentlemen, we are watching history hold its breath. The events of early 2026 are not merely diplomatic maneuvers. They are the quiet, desperate gasps of an old order trying to reclaim its lost dominion. The West has realized that it cannot bomb the Sahel into submission, so it is trying to buy it back. They have traded their fighter jets for loan agreements, hoping that the ink of a pen can achieve what the roar of a cannon could not. But they have miscalculated the spirit of the people. The citizens of the Alliance of Sahel States have tasted something far sweeter than foreign aid. They have tasted dignity. For Burkina Faso, this moment is the ultimate test of character. It is easy to say no to an enemy standing at the gates with a gun. It is much harder to say no to a friend standing in your parlor with a checkbook. But the leadership in Ouagadougou understands a fundamental truth of geopolitics. The hand that feeds you is the hand that controls you. This is the legacy that Captain Ibrahim Traoré is carving into the bedrock of history. He is not just building a state. He is dismantling a psychology that has plagued the continent for centuries. He is teaching a generation that the soil under their feet is rich enough to grow their own future, if only they have the courage to till it with their own hands. He is a sower, planting seeds in the middle of a storm, trusting that the harvest will feed those who are yet to be born. The nuclear plants will take time to build. The solar grids will take sweat to construct. The road of resistance is long, and the dust is heavy. But it is their road. Imagine the year 2035. Imagine the lights turning on in a village in the Sahel, powered not by French charity, but by a reactor built on sovereign soil. That is the vision they are fighting for. That is the price of the struggle today. The fate of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger will determine whether Africa remains a continent of eternal potential or becomes a powerhouse of realized power. The world is betting on them to fail. They are betting on them to take the easy money and return to the fold. Let us prove them wrong. This story is not over. It is just beginning. The ink is still wet, and the map is still being drawn. If you believe the sun of sovereignty is worth the heat of the struggle, stand with us. Subscribe, share, and let the algorithm know that Africa is awake.